and today I'll talk about morphological interfaces by presenting an overview of research from various fields, a framework for classifying a lot of physical augmentation techniques, and discussions on potential challenges. I have to apologize. This talk is going to be a little bit of a classroom style, so I didn't know it's going to be afternoon, but I hope you don't die during the presentation. So I'd like to start with 3 bullet points. The body is an interface. The image of the body is plastic. And what does it mean to design the body morphology? Embodied cognitive science emphasizes the role of the body in that the feedback between the world and an agent is structured by the nature of an agent's body. In other words, the body is an interface that governs how we interact with or perceive the world. In 1996, researchers monitored brain activity of a monkey when it's fetching food. They found that after 5 minutes of using a rake to fetch food, the monkey's brain strong responses not only when the food is placed around the monkey's body, but also when it is around the monkey's the tool it's holding. It suggests that the definition of personal space in the monkey's brain has been updated as a result of the tool use. Scientists also conducted studies in VR with different avatar shapes to see their effect. In this study by van der Hoort and colleagues showed being in a body of different sizes changes how a person perceives the size of the space as well. So, sorry for the lack of translation. We all know the body determines what we can do, but the crux here I want to point out is that it also determines how we think overall. So, if a change in the body changes how we act or think, can we actually make changes to the body for a desired effect? Or how much of a novelty in the body can our brain accommodate? Jaron Lanier proposed the idea of homuncular flexibility, suggesting that our brain is capable of adapting to radically different body shapes. He argues that we can successfully inhabit non-human avatars in virtual reality. In his recent user experiment with Andrew Wan and Jeremy Balins at Stanford University, they found that people were able to strategically adapt to novel avatars in VR. In one of their experiments, test subjects were asked to pop balloons falling from the sky in VR, and they were presented with 3 different avatar configurations. One, a normal humanoid one-to-one mapping, and another one where leg and arm controls were switched, and the last one where the leg motions were amplified to go much higher up. In the latter 2 configurations, the subjects quickly adapted and used their feet more after figuring out it was more efficient. In another setup, the subjects used an avatar with an extra arm, which is much longer than their original ones. And similarly to the first experiment, the subjects quickly adapted and showed significantly increased success rate using the 3rd arm. A more physical version will be this research from the University of Pittsburgh. They used EEG electrodes on a monkey's brain, and the monkey was trained to control a robotic gripper for self-feeding. In a 2-day experiment, the monkey was able to perform a self-feeding task with a combined success rate of 61%. Not only that it was able to learn how to control the arm, but it also showed very interesting unexpected behaviors, such as moving the arm to lick the gripper, which is quite amazing. It is also possible to trigger the feeling of having a 3rd arm. In this variant of the rubber hand illusion experiment, test subjects were presented with their own arm and a rubber arm side by side, and the researchers simultaneously made brushstrokes on both arms to fake the subjects into believing both are actually their own. In their paper, subjects felt relatively strong ownership and the feeling of having 2 right arms, even reporting that they felt touches on both the rubber and the real hand at the same time. Another notable work by Bakirida and her colleague used a solenoid array to send video stream to visually impaired subjects to their back. Of course, they were able to recognize objects using the camera, but the more interesting part is that the subjects reported the source of the stimulus to be in front of the camera, not in their back. There was such possibility of adapting to novel body configurations. What does it mean to design the body? This is quite long. So, to quote cognitive scientist Andy Clark, bodily shape and biomechanics reconfigure a wide variety of problems in ways that promote fluidity and efficiency by simplifying the neural commands required to bring about complex behaviors of the body. This fact is fleshed out in an anatomical study where it is shown that tendon structure in the forearm actually works as switching circuits. That does sort of a computation, as a result, simplifying neural commands required for articulated hand controls. This video clip is from the movie Gattaca, where a genetically defect pianist plays a Schubert's composition with 12 fingers. They even added more notes to the original composition, which is a very nice touch. But the point I want to make here is the effect of altered or designed body that results in new possibilities. And it is actually known from literature that hand size and span govern how effectively one can learn piano. On a related note, an archive paper from 2014 by Baumer and colleagues imagined what would be presented in Kai 25 years later. This speculative paper talks about touchscreen use with more than 10 fingers, and where they found the optimal number of fingers and their configurations. A critical and very interesting difference between the speculative paper and conventional HCA research is that this paper regards the human body as part of design. This is an excerpt from the book Natural Born Cyborgs, where the author, Andy Clark, tells a story about a person buying a prosthetic arm, a 6th finger for it, and a fingertip infrared camera connected to his optic nerve. Interestingly enough, years after the book, in academia, these concepts are actually being realized. And not only these works, there are a range of works in various research fields and art rethinking the human body, which we hope to introduce and put into categories under the name of morphological interfaces. So what are morphological interfaces? We define those as body-integrated devices that either reconfigure either external or internal morphologies of a person. We surveyed works from field of robotics, HCI, and art, and created this framework for categorizing different body-transforming technologies. The first category is series limb exoskeleton. Unlike the usual kind of exoskeleton we think about, the ones that get onto the body side by side and make it strong, for example, series limb exoskeletons connect along our limbs then give extensions or new properties to body extremities. These contraptions, spring walker, and skeletonics are very good examples. They extend the person's limb and let them become taller, bigger, or have faster or more economic maneuvers. A lot of Rebecca Horn's artwork are also very notable. She experiments with a wide range of different body attachments to reflect on the relationship between one's body and the world around. Especially the pencil mask turns the face into having end effectors that leave marks to the environment, whereas the face is normally used as sensory organ usually. The second category is supernumerary robots. They're designed to add extra limbs to a user and collaborate with the user's original limbs. The Center for Music Technology at Georgia Tech works on this third arm drumming system, where a drummer is augmented and become able to play the drums with 3 arms. In their system, EEG signals are used to direct the arm to a specific drum, and the stroke patterns are generated automatically based on the music being played. Of course, we have to mention the artist Stellark. His important works, including the third arm, which I shown before, and exoskeleton and so on, visually and physically demonstrate the radical idea of becoming human-machine hybrids. Harry Asada's group at MIT pioneers the field of supernumerary robots. They built a variety of systems, including this pair of extra arms sitting on the shoulder, and helps in an assembly task. They use SpectriNet and sensors to let the robot automatically identify what step of an assembly process a worker is in and proactively adapt to the worker's context. Similar to the shoulder robot, their 7-finger robot demonstrates the use of data gloves to map the robotic finger movements to assimilate biological ones, so that all 7 fingers can move in a very well-coordinated way. The next category is slightly different from the first two, in that instead of changing the external shape of the body, the idea is to use the internal morphology, let's say muscular structure, to drive the body through computation. Possessed Pan from Tokyo University and various works from Pedro Lopez and his colleagues show the use of electrical muscle stimulation for using the body as an output or a telepresence surrogate. Daito Manabe used the same technique for controlling facial muscles in his media art works as well. These works demonstrate the use of existing internal morphology, muscles here, to generate motions. But a more interesting potential beyond these works is that we can also drive muscles in ways not possible through neural commands. For example, electrical stimulation can activate muscle groups that are normally not coordinated together to create novel and unusual movement patterns of the person. Finally, sensory motor retargeting is to make new mappings between sensory input, output, and motor actions. As mentioned when I introduced Bakirita's work, the test subjects didn't feel the information as coming from their back, but instead from the camera. In other words, the subjects were able to adapt to the new sensory motor loop provided by the system and quickly internalize the new perception pipeline. Finger Reader by Roy Schildkraut and his colleagues demonstrated a similar idea with a finger-mounted camera. Visually impaired users can point at text, and the camera will read the text verbally to the user, essentially turning your finger into a sensory probe. Ishin Denshin, in a similar vein, uses the fingertip, but for sensory output instead of input. A spoken audio message is transmitted through the fingertip when it makes contact with another person's ear. So, supposedly, the kind of technology I introduced here are tightly coupled with a user's body and often used for a very extended period of time. Such a close integration to the users poses challenges in how we should design applications, physical mechanisms, or control interfaces for those. We'd like to talk about those aspects in a few points summarized as synergistic interaction, modularity, reconfigurability, and human-machine interface. The use of always available devices, such as smartphones, often over-enforces the use of the technology or nudges people to take certain actions, like you keep checking your emails on your phone. This is also summarized as two of the paradoxes in using mobile technologies. Similarly, when we talk about human-machine integration, it is often described as a very dystopian thing, where the human nature is replaced by lifeless mechanical devices. So we believe that it is important to find the synergy between machines and humans when it comes to using those kind of technologies. In our previous work presented at CHI last year, we explore use cases of shape-changing robotic fingers where the human hand and the robotic hand complement each other. The core idea behind these applications were not to let the robot take over whatever user has got to do, but instead synergistically work together, so both the human hand and the robotic finger take parts equally. This concept of synergistic interaction has also been partly demonstrated in projects like Digital Airbrush and 3D by Amit Saran, Roy Schildkraut, and their colleagues, where the hand tools give haptic intervention when a user is about to make a mistake, but the user can still override the intervention when he wants to add creative additions to the artwork, making it more of a human-machine dialogue instead of enforcing the correct behaviors. Another challenge is how to accommodate changing needs or support evolving use of those technologies. Especially since wearables can be cumbersome, it will be very important for them to be useful in ever-changing real-world context and easily be disengaged when the user doesn't need them anymore. So we're designing the modular robotic platform for building customized self-augmentation devices. You can daisy-chain different motor or sensor blocks together and put different tooltips at the end to support varying physical activities, like playing guitar, shown in the video. Also, when a user don't need it anymore, it can simply be disengaged by plugging it off from your wrist arm module. IKEA creative prosthetic system demonstrates similar like in a system, but for a prosthetic platform for kids, where the kids can build their own prosthetic arm using Lego blocks. Daniel Leithinger, Sean Fulmer, and their colleagues demonstrated physical telepresence using shape display. A notable and very interesting part in their paper is where they replaced the hand model with different shapes, such as a ramp or a hook, to support more effective handling of physical objects. Ideally, similar to the T-1000 in the Terminator movie, a fully reconfigurable body augmentation would allow us to manage varying extreme physical environments better. The last challenge that we want to touch upon is how we can well design a human-machine interface for such systems. For example, a third arm would require adding extra channel for neural commands or so, in addition to existing control mappings we have for our own biological body. In our previous work, we picked up the muscle signal around the forearm that has little interference with regular hand gestures, therefore one can control the robotic fingers independently from the biological ones. And to allow multiple different actions here, we channel the same control signal to our software and map the same signal to different pre-coded motions. However, for a more articulated control, we definitely need ways to increase the bandwidth of signal communication between machines and the body. Some clues can be found from medical domain. Targeted muscle reinnervation is a technique to transfer remaining arm nerves of an amputated limb to residual muscles around it. so that the residual muscles can be used as amplifiers so that we can pick up EMG signals that are no longer really used. These signals are used for prosthetic control in this case, but we can also imagine using underemployed muscles around the body for controlling extra robotic arms. Another technique I want to introduce is osseointegration, where a prosthetic arm is directly interfaced with the remaining bone structure. Especially, this technique allows directly connecting electrodes from inside the arm, either to get clean EMG signals or to electrically stimulate the remaining nerves. This paper reports that they were even able to chronically reproduce tactile perception despite more than 10 years of amputation, which was never reported in clinical studies before. I'd like to summarize. We discussed neuroscience and cognitive science studies in order to investigate the plausibility of body transforming or morphological interfaces. And based on existing technologies, we proposed 4 categories of morphological interfaces. And we discussed challenges in realizing such systems with our work and prior art. I hope this paper can open a door to the idea of designing or transforming the body and trigger discussions on how human-machine hybrid system can be or how it should be designed within our community. Thank you very much. Right.
However, there's a large population of amputees with implantables, and that's an opportunity for a population to actually use this type of research.
That's right. I can actually answer that in many ways. Indeed, assistive technology is a very big domain and a very useful research topic to go for. But I personally am interested in using the same kind of technology for both for people who need special help, but also people who doesn't need help to go beyond what it is. So what is this sweet spot? That is one part of the research. And as you said, invasive technologies are really hard to investigate. And that's also partly why I mostly introduce technology in wearable forms. So the shoulder robot, that is not really invasive. It's heavy, that can be a problem. But mostly they are designed for people with neurophysiology. So I think the first step should be working on those lines of technology where we don't need to really modify things from inside.
Hi, I'm Raimund Axel, Interactive Media Lab Dresden. I've got a question which is a little bit obvious maybe, but somebody has to ask it obviously. Sure. I noticed in your talk you were not with a single syllabus mentioning something like ethics or how this changes our life or so. It was such a technological driven view of augmenting the human body.
That's right.
I really think as scientists we can't do that without thinking about ethics.
Yeah, that's so true.
And I really encourage you, and especially at MIT Media Lab, to of course also involve in the discussion about ethics and what you are actually doing, because you are stretching the things quite far, and it's frightening too. I mean, you should, maybe, what's your take on that?
Oh yeah, that's very important topic. It is just that this particular paper, the scope was on the technical aspect of it, and how the brain has the capability to actually accommodate this. But it's true that when these kind of self-transforming technologies become prevalent, it can signify a lot of problems. Probably people with more money will be able to become healthier, stronger, where people don't have those resources wouldn't be able to afford those. But the way I think it is that the technologies keep coming closer to the body, and there will be a certain point where those will happen. I think it's not that we shouldn't go for it, but we have to think about how these technologies can be more accessible, or how as researchers we can design certain technologies so that it doesn't empower people doesn't need an empowerment, but more that it democratizes capabilities. Let's say you are this person who wants to do music, but you don't have you lost your hand, you cannot play. Then how we can help those situations to overcome their limitations or become a better player. Yeah, I'm kind of lost a little bit. But I think it's not that it is missing from the presentation, but I think that's something that has to come when it comes to the designing, designing of the application and designing the guidelines on how we should create the products and how a government should approve certain products like that.
Okay, thank you. So Tigo Bayagis from HP Labs. It's interesting that a lot of the examples that you gave were body inspired, like arms, fingers, and I wonder like how important that aspect is to this sense of self. For example, like I'm thinking about cars. Like I don't really feel like my car is a sense of self, but it very much acts in a way that. So
that is a very interesting question, and actually don't have an answer, and that's a big top, like, discussion going on in cognitive science, where, like, there are a lot of different rubber hand illusion experiments, where some people say when the rubber hand is, like, placed differently, that you don't feel like it's your body. Then, like, there's some sort of, like, egocentricity, like, coming into play, where, like, things has to be around the body, things has to coming out from this, like, like geometrical, like configuration. But it's true that, like, probably it's only because we used to live with this kind of body, which is attached to our brain. Probably it can, like, change in the future where we can feel like the cloud, like software, is also part of our body. But I know the reason I focused on most, like, the technology around the actual body was that, like, the neuroscience studies, like, sort of like, nail the fact that, like, we can feel those are, like, extensions of ourselves. But, like, when it goes to more radical, like, configurations, like, do you feel the building is part of yourself? Then I don't think, like, there's much of a, like, evidence, like, supporting the possibility. But hopefully, like, somebody test it out, and it'll, like, probably open up more research questions as well. Thank you.